Well, thank you very much for that lovely, lovely intro, Peter. I'm Rachel Nabors, and I love web animations, like crazy love. I love them so much that I even left my perfectly good front-end development job slash career path to start my own company so I could just work with web animation all the time. And that is an important distinction. We were just talking about 3D animation. I'm talking about 2D animation. Who here is excited about 2D animation? Yeah! All right, this is my audience. Hey guys in the back, I can see you. All right, so yeah, this is the kind of thing that I make with CSS and JavaScript, and it's so much fun. These are some of my more notorious projects you may or may not have seen in the past. They're very fun, they're very creative, but you can tell this is not a shopping cart. This is one of the reasons why it didn't work out when I was interviewing in the Bay. They looked at this and they said, "But we just want you to use AngularJS. What is this?" And I was like, "I'm starting my own company. I'm moving to Portland. Can't stop me." And I did this. So this is the reason I'm talking so much about myself here is I want to make sure you know something. I don't represent anybody but myself, except I did do the Alice in Wonderland thing there. I did make that for Adobe's Inspire magazine, but that's about as vested as my interests go. I'm not a dev rel from Google or from Mozilla or have any past work experience with Adobe. I'm not repping anyone's interest, but my love of animation. So this is completely 100% unbiased account of web animation on the internet today, where we've come from, where we're going, and the attitudes that most people don't want to talk about except on one-on-one hushed cocktail sessions. But I should tell you one thing. I love CSS. So I came into web animation from this crazy CSS background. And that is my one bias. I came in thinking CSS was the best. And it's not always, and we'll talk about that. All right, so I write and I speak and I teach about animation. That's one of the ways that I keep doing animation for funsies. I talk about it from UX to implementation, because seriously, I'm so crazy about it. And the reason I'm so crazy about it might be because before I was a front-end developer, I was an award-winning cartoonist. And this is what I did for like the first 7 years of my adult life. Well, I guess if you start counting from the age of 18, yeah. No, it's been longer. Oh my God, I'm losing track of time now. Anyway, point was, I did comics for 7 years, and I won awards, and I had hordes of screaming teenage fangirls. I was like, one day I'm gonna have my own cartoon. Oh, boom, life happened. I need a better career that actually has health insurance and that sort of thing. Okay, web development. Put all those awards up in the cabinet, watch all the other cartoonists go on to struggle and do great things with their lives and their careers, and I'm just like, I do stuff with CSS. So anyway, cartooning, it's a skill that comes in handy when I'm on the stage. That's my story, but I'm not up here to continue talking about myself. I'm up here to start talking about some other people and tell their stories. So I want to know, I want to hear, see a show of hands as we go forward. How many of you work for browsers? Okay, all right. You guys, I'm glad you're here. Thank you. I've got special messages for you at the end. How many of you design user interfaces? Or in other circumstances, work with UX? Okay, good. Glad you're here, too. And who here is an interaction developer? Okay, an interaction developer tends to do like moving infographics, dashboards, games, does things that react to people, not just making menu bars, but we're talking about something you dive in and it reacts. Oh man, this is a poor show of hands. But I'm glad you came anyway. Thank you for repping. And lastly, does anyone in the audience maintain an animation library of some sort? All right, you're up too. Okay, good. So these are their stories. I travel, I speak, I write. I told you about this. I've been all over the place. I've been to Europe and back again over the past 2 years. And I've had many of those one-on-one cocktail sessions with all 4 of these different types of people who keep showing up in my life over and over again, and they all keep telling the same stories. So to protect the innocent, I don't name any names. And if any of these people seem familiar to you, it's all in your head. Let's get started. Since Flash, animation has largely been considered decorative. Who here hasn't made a joke about flashy or flashturbation online at one point to get a chuckle out of a crowd? Yes, we like to do that. So people have started to kind of disregard animation on the web, especially since it's seen as purely decorative, a bow you slap onto the present before you deliver it at the birthday party, a glorified blink tag. Parallax is the new skip intro. But animation's actually pretty useful. When you get down to it, animation is really simple. It's just a visual representation of a rate of change over time and space. Quick question, can you guys see these all right over there? Okay, good. They look really dull from this angle, and I'm like, dang, I need to increase that contrast. Okay, good. So that's all it is. That's all animation is. It's not special. It's not necessarily like a cat chasing someone around. It's not clippy. It's just a visual representation of rate of change over time and space. And we have audio versions of this too, but we were visually oriented when we developed for the web, so that's what we're talking about today. Now, you user interface designers, you guys know that when it comes to showing pretty much anything other than copy on the web, animation is your friend. See a couple of nodding faces. Yeah, I see quite, yes. Animation is our friend. Animation helps guide users through interactions using relationships, structure, cause and effect. It adds information back into an otherwise stripped down, sterile environment, and human brains crave those little bits of animation. And of course, it can be abused. You can abuse it to make really annoying things, but if you add just the right touches, the right physics to a UI, you can make it feel that much more performant, that much more useful. There we go. That was the sales pitch for it. But this is all my other talk. But just for those of you who are like, I need to know, I need proof that what you just said is true, that people actually prefer to use things that are animated, Rachel. I do have lots of papers going back all the way to the early 90s. And basically what this quote here says is researchers for operating systems, working on operating systems back in the 90s found that we can speed up a user's mental processing by offloading their interpolation of 2 states to their visual cortex. Basically, it's the brain's GPU, so that they can have 2 tasks running on the brain at the same time. They don't have to stop and think about where they've come from and where they're going if you animate all of that for them. And that makes a huge difference to young and old users. Most of us in this room, I'm not trying to be ageist here, but I'm going to say the majority of us are in the prime of our computer usage lives. And if we're not in that sweet spot, we're probably adapted to still be working in that sweet spot. But we are not some old granny on a mountaintop who's got her first tablet from her grandkids and she's frightened by this thing and she doesn't know how it's working and oh, jump cuts. So transitions are there for those users. So interaction developers, they make complex animations. They're often experienced with Flash. They work with interactive infographics, dashboards, video games. They go beyond just animating, the button depressed. They're doing things like this. If you want things like this on the internet, you need animation. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation as a little kid, this is the sort of thing I imagined. I didn't imagine a beautifully, perfectly styled typographic, responsive web design accessing Wikipedias. I mean, it's like a really fancy book. I appreciate that. But I wanted this. This is what I expected a future of information to look like when I was a little kid. And there is still a place for this. And if we want this, we're going to have to embrace animation as a part of the internet. So, I mean, Google knows. Who hasn't seen the material design documentation. It's awesome. I love this. Somebody finally bothered to write up, what good motion design looks like and make that public and not bury it under a bunch of papers from 1990s. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Google. Google knows that products that use animation correctly to benefit their users will succeed. IBM knows that static or animation-abusing competitors will fail where animation-successful ones will have that little added extra benefit that's going to make users want them more. This has been a long time in coming for the web. Operating systems designers, the designers working on Mac and the designers working on iOS and people who build apps, they've known this for a long, long time. We've been sticking our fingers in our ears going, ever since Flash. And that's largely because Flash is a tool, and we identify too much with tools. But I will scold you all about that later. So animation's definitely coming back. The web is going to get it. It's coming. We can't stop the animation train. It's just the next natural step in evolution of human-computer interfaces. It's not going away anytime soon. Now, I want to give us a little vocabulary before we go too far, because the opinions I'm about to express require a common vocabulary, so you know what I'm talking about. Let's define how we use animations. There are 3 different kinds of animations online. We combine them all in many different ways to build different kinds of things. There's static animations. Now, static is misleading, but I couldn't think of a better word for it. But basically what it means is it's self-contained. It has a start state, and it goes to the finished state. And you can tell it to go back or whatever, but the point is that it just kind of does its own thing, and it doesn't require any human input. For instance, this here, all of this is CSS. And it's actually got music, but I turned the music off for this because I didn't want you guys getting distracted by the rockin' music video. Point is that you can do a lot with animations that don't take user input. And it looks cool, but it's not very useful. So stateful animations. Stateful animations are where they start taking input, but it's very simple. It's kind of like a Boolean input. You've got a default state, something happens, and then you get a predefined state. Typically, a human comes up with this predefined state. This is very important here, because if a computer is coming up with it, a computer can come up with a lot of states. And at that point, you don't have a state engine, you have a physics engine. So when we talk about stateful animation, here's an open and a closed state on a drop-down. And notice that we're animating between the open and the closed state. And it looks really good. That looks great. So stateful animation, very useful to our UI designers in the cloud, in the crowd. CSS, it's got a couple of built-in handlers for that, like hover and selected and target, but you can see where I had to embrace JavaScript to get beyond those, to get beyond just single self-contained animations. Now in apps, you can see these states a lot more clearly. Here, we've gone from the main overview state, we've zoomed into Evernote, and we're going to go from browsing to, oh, what's this? Now we're picking out what we want to read. Here, obviously, we're animating to a reading state, oh, an editing state. Oh, look, here we've animated in the keyboard, and we're in a writing state. There are only 3 states in Evernote, searching, writing, and reading, and each one of them is animated. Now, depending on which Evernote product you're using, the animations are more or less wonderful. Some versions of Evernote have been really well done with their animating between the states. It's not so great. For instance, the iPads, I think, a little bit more jump to different states. But the iPhone one does a lot of animation because animation is kind of necessary whenever you're using a small touch input. Now, dynamic animations are where things start getting tricky and where JavaScript and CSS start kind of stumbling over each other. So a dynamic animation works, saying that 3 times fast, dynamic animation. Dynamic animations take rules and variables you give them, and rather than going to a predefined state, it spits out a new end state based on those things that you've given it. It does a little processing, it crunches some numbers. An example of dynamic animations might be a first-person shooter. I mean, you could technically, you could make a state for each one of those. different angles you could have a bullet hit the other person. That would be crazy. So anyway, dynamic animations are the trickiest for us to implement right now. I'm very fortunate to have a friend, Alex Grawl. He did let me credit him and use his name for this one. This is an overview for a security, this is a demo of a security system checker. The little red dots are breaches that need to be investigated. This is for someone to look over many, many, many computers and keep an eye on whether or not they are compromised. And this is something that if you could imagine doing this, can you imagine just any other way of doing this? Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm trying to imagine what this would look like as a bunch of line items in a spreadsheet with little color updates, and I can't. That's just miserable sounding. So it's tricky, but it's so useful. So useful, we want this. Now, there's somebody in the audience who has been like, Rachel, if you get enough states in a stateful animation, doesn't that look an awful lot like a dynamic animation? I can do that with CSS. I don't need to worry about dynamic animation. Yeah, you can do that, but after a point, it doesn't work out so well. Stateful animation can only go to the designated states you give it, right? It's not smart. It's you telling the computer what to do still. You can imitate it, but what you really want is this full spectrum of response from that input. It's going to have many more end states than you can anticipate. And it doesn't matter how clever your code pen is. You're at one point going to have to build logic into your animation. So I'm going to give you a really pedantic example as a CSSer. This is the so-called simple loading bar. And I could imagine like this is a container div, and there's this div in there, and I'm going to like update the body with this loading thing, and it's like that. And then there's going to be that, and there's going to be that. And it's going to keep going. I'm going to have 100 lines of that. But I'm a CSS person, so I can tell you some much more clever way to do that. But this is the point. The point is, yes, you could do this, but it would take forever. And it would be really bulky. It would be much easier to just build a state machine. So stateful animations exist where the static and the dynamic animations overlap. A little bit of logic, but not enough to land on its own feet. Declarative versus reactive. CSS animations specifically are declarative. They don't take any context. They just do what they're told. It doesn't contain logic. You say what goes where, when. This, for instance, is a spinner. You put when you give it a body class of loaded, its opacity goes to 0. You can make CSS more declarative by using those states. You can make it act more like dynamic animation with a little bit of JavaScript. You put all the logic in there. This is just an event listener. It listens for load. When it happens, and the transition is over, it removes a spinner. It's a little bit of JavaScript to handle that super nicely and adds a class of loaded. And you can do pretty cool stuff with this. This is from my friend Madeline Woods over at Square. This is beautiful, right? And the great thing about this kind of CSS first UI is that it degrades so nicely in older browsers. This is what happens in a version of Internet Explorer that doesn't support animations. It didn't break, not like that beautiful. I would hate to think what would have happened to that UI panel in certain versions of IE, but not in future versions of IE, because IE is getting better. So as you can see, interface designers are like, this totally works. I love my CSS. I don't need anything more than my CSS transitions. This is me right there. Don't talk smack about my CSS. I can do it all. But for interaction developers, it's just still too declarative. You can't make an HTML5 game with CSS transitions and animations. I mean, you could, but it would be very limited in what you could do. It would be a state-based game, and this probably more like a point-and-click adventure game. Did anybody ever play point-and-click adventure games like King's Quest or Monkey Island? You guys are my friends. All right, so as you can see, while CSS and UI people often want a better state engine, interaction developers want a more performant animation model. And what do developers do when they can't find the right tool for a job? They what? They roll their own, yeah. And that's where we get this guy. He's a little late to this demo here, but he's been around since the era of Flash. He's got domain knowledge. He knows a lot of things about performance and rendering and GPUs, things that you and I are going to have to spend 2 years like studying to figure out. He knows this. He figured this back in 2003. They also tend to conform to their own processes. Having been in the field for so long, they have their own ideas about how things should be done, and they tend to be really possessive of their technologies and defensive of their methods and their techniques. This can be problematic when having conversations in a greater audience. But let's talk about two of the biggest. GSAP right now. This has been around since the era of Flash. It was the green sock animation platform. GSAP was a tweening library for Flash. And the developers were smart enough that when they saw the writing on the wall, they rewrote it in JavaScript. And this is, when you see something really cool from, like one of those really cool dynamic animations from the New York Times or something like that, there's a really good possibility that under the hood, there's some GSAP in there. All of the things that when the future of web awards that are interactive, there's some GSAP in there. You view the source, you'll see it. And it's a very supportive community. They have forums, crazy amounts of outreach. It's truly a labor of love. I'm here in animation. I know that they're not rolling around in filthy amounts of money. But, you know, good job, GSAP. But they're the current heavyweight. For people who are coming down from the jQuery high, we've got Velocity.js, which is a drag-and-drop replacement for jQuery's really laggy animate. It's still not as performant as GSAP in many situations, but if you're stuck using jQuery, and I don't mean like this is a bad thing, it's just you can't always use the latest and the greatest. Some people have platforms that are built to work with a certain tool set, and you're gonna keep using them for quite some time. If you're using jQuery and you're using jQuery Animate, look into Velocity because it's so much more performant for your users. It just replaces Animate. Ba-bing! There you go. These are great, but I got this to tell you. There are so many homegrown animation libraries that you are never going to see. They are never going on GitHub. They will never be publicly supported for many reasons. Interaction development tends to be done at ad agencies. Ad agencies don't like to let their people go talk because they don't want them to get a bunch of job offers, and nobody brings in more ad or marketing work when they go to speak at a conference like Fluent. They come back with job offers. And that's how you lose your guy who built the animation library that all your clients are using. So they don't let them out to play often. As a person who speaks at a lot of tech conferences, I can tell you, I don't get a lot of animation work from them. I actually don't get a lot of job offers from them too, because I think they just wish that I'd use Angular. But the point being, I can understand why these agencies that employ these awesome interaction developers don't like to let them out to play with the other developers very often. But additionally, there's an overhead when you release a library like this into the wild. We love in open source to preach that if you release it into the wild, it'll be so much better. If you are a marketing company and your obligation is to make super awesome things that your competitors cannot duplicate and to do them expediently, and you want to burn your developers out on making cool stuff, the last thing you want them to do is to give your precious secret weapons to the competition and then to spend all their time supporting those guys. Just keep them in-house. You keep them in-house. So you're not going to see a lot of what people are using to do some of these really incredible things. We're kind of lucky we have stuff like GSAP out there. Labor of love. Now, I don't know, we've got a lot of youngsters in the audience, so I think it's time for a little Flash history lesson. It was not always this way. Once upon a time, we had a benevolent dictator, and it was known as Flash. And Flash ruled upon the land of interaction and UI and animation, and it gave its people a good timeline tool And it had its quirks. It demanded things of people. You know, it was royalty. You were subscribing to this policies that only one technology could rule them all. But you know, you had a timeline interface. Come on. It was good. Things were good. You had a great user interface that your developers and your designers could get behind, and there was flow there, and it was easy to iterate, and you could rely on it running decently well across all platforms available at that time. It was sort of the jQuery of its day. Everyone was united. But then, in 2010, bum, 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 Steve Jobs sent a very miffy letter saying, no, we're not going to support Flash because it makes the damn thing crash so much, and we just don't want people saying, why is my browser always crashing on my new device? It looks much better to just say, it's not supported. So Flash was downcast. And although at the time, many people would argue Flash isn't dead, to many extents it isn't dead, it is dead online. And it is thoroughly dead online. And all its devs were ridiculed at development events by remarks and jokes about Flash, and they secretly would die a little inside every time in the back corner, and they stopped coming, and they had their midlife crises, and they opened motorcycle shops. Once again, I'm not naming names. And web design stepped back into a more stateful, copy-oriented place and focused on things like responsive web design, font families, and proper leading. And the old guard was vanquished. Schools stopped teaching Flash, and with no HTML5 alternative apparent, new web designers often came out of school and training with no real idea of what was possible beyond those stateful CSS animations. With no tools, no performance, no coverage, no stability, a jaded old guard looking on as the new struggle to find their way. And that is all about to change. Welcome to the Web Animation API, an API you probably haven't heard of. It's a W3C specification which basically provides a unified language for CSS and SVG animations. I should make clear that this is not some sort of a Flash replacement. That will become apparent momentarily. What makes the Web Animation API so valuable is the possibilities it opens up for developers. But first, let's meet the author. Hello. This is our representative of animation spec authors and implementers from browsers. This is the person that you'd probably talk to if you were on IRC, but who is? He's our final player. The Web Animation API, it's been 2 years in the making. Features been rolling out in Firefox and Chrome nightlies over the past 6 months. What it does is it opens up the browser's animation, CSS animation engine and unifies it. Right now, the CSS animation and transition specs run on different engines, but this, and even Smile, the SVG animation language, runs on a different engine. This is the one API to rule them all. Now browsers are going to be like conforming. All of those transitions and animations will be running off this API. And the best thing is that because of that, we can build dev tools to manipulate APIs. And okay, maybe browsers themselves won't make the world's best dev tools, but that shouldn't stop our wonderful animation library developers and interaction developers from building their own. The idea is that the guts are open. You can get in there now. It's not a black box. None of this tool right here would not be possible without the Web Animation API. And this is just a preview. It's not actually available yet. Fingers crossed. But that one was from Chrome. Okay, so there are a lot of things that interaction developers miss about Flash. Speaking about the Web Animation API, does it have performant animations? Does it have motion paths? Does it have callbacks, nesting and sequencing, pause, play, reverse, seek, all these good things? Oh, it totally does. Because it opens up the engine, it opens up the timeline as well. Here's an example. I just put this one together super quick. On this side here, we've got a cat that's being reproduced with CSS animations. I'm cloning him, and they're all running. But as you can see, they're all running at different times because they're starting at different times. But here, I'm reproducing the cat using the Web Animation API. I'm going in, I'm taking that first cat's time object, and I'm syncing each additional cat to start at that time. so all of their time objects are in sync. That is not possible with CSS animations. It's not even possible with just JavaScript. You can only do this with the Web Animation API. That's how important it is. It lets you do these small things that open up big possibilities. Unfortunately, of all the people I've talked with, very few of them have read the spec. It's huge. It's what I call a 2-bathtub spec. I don't know about you guys, but I put the iPad in a big old Ziploc bag, and it's like, I'm going into the bathtub to read some specs tonight. And that's my idea of a good time. You know, honey, bring me chocolate milk. I'm in the bathtub. I love messaging. And yes. So this one requires at least two refills of the bathtub to get through. Let me go ahead and answer their pressing questions right here. Support. Who's going to support this? Right now, Mozilla is doing a lot of writing and documentation. We can hope to see some shortly on MDN. Fingers crossed. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Chrome has been doing a lot of implementation. But right now, there are a lot of different things. This is Are We Animated Yet by Brian Birtles. And it shows the status of the implementations of the different features of the API for Firefox nightly. But the plan is that eventually to extend this out for Chrome and for Internet Explorer and Safari, should it wish to join the club. Yeah, so right now, as you can see, there's a lot of red. I took this today, but it's coming along. It's coming along. It's a pretty massive effort. Internet Explorer, this is under consideration, but they've given some pretty positive remarks. There are places where you can go on their developer shout-out boards where you can vote features up. I go in periodically and vote web animations up. I wonder if they can tell it's me. Damn it! All that time for nothing. Okay, I guess they just know that they have one really, really eager developer. All right, and then as far as Safari goes, they've adopted a wait-and-see approach, which is kind of weird given that Safari is the one responsible for the CSS animations and transitions spec implementations as we know them today, which if you talk about this with people in W3C, you'll be like, but I totally would have called this property something else, so it worked better with the SVG animations. It doesn't make any sense with this naming convention. I totally get that because Safari was just like, we want animations, we're just gonna do this, it's cool. But now it's kind of interesting because they adopted a wait-and-see attitude with the Web Animation API as well. Be that way, Safari, be that way. It's just because you're worried that apps are going to pale in comparison when the internet catches up and is as app-like as they are. I even hate that we call it app-like. It's like everything should be this way. And this is to say nothing about the web app engines in devices like Kindle Fire, Firefox OS, and Windows 8. We have no idea when the Web Animation API is going to hit there. There's not even a can I use for those things. I should know. I was poking around with them for a while. There is polyfill, which is incredibly useful, and I recommend going to the polyfill site and reading the spec there because it's a much better overview than reading the actual 2-bathtub spec. This will take you like 10 minutes. So you can go ahead, read the polyfill, get a gist for like, oh, nested timelines. That sounds useful. GSAP still outperforms the polyfill. The polyfill is working with JavaScript and CSS and not necessarily directly, GSAP outperforms the polyfill where the Web Animation API is not supported, to make it abundantly clear. The Web Animation API does a darn tootin' good job where it's supported, and it definitely competes, I think, on par in most circumstances. But once again, you saw the Are We Animated Yet chart. That's got a long way to go before we have that kind of coverage that you can rely on. So interaction developers won't be using it in production work in the near future. However, in the near future, library developers should be keen on looking into these. I mean, just a little bit of sniffing for support, and you could be tapping into the very guts of the browser's rendering engine. Which brings us to performance boosts. Because it uses the same rendering as a rendering engine as CSS, the performance is the same. You can expect the same sort of bottlenecks and the same sort of performance boosts that you get when you use CSS animations. So who read this when it came out? All right, I want to see your hands. All right, okay, I got to explain to everybody else. So what happened is, this is Flipboard. Flipboard is an app I don't actually use, but the developers are super nice. They were so nice, in fact, that they wrote this whole post called 60 frames per second on the mobile web. Basically, what they came out and said was, we can't animate the DOM fast enough for it to not be janky. We have to find another way to make this experience perfect for our users, to make the animations smooth and crisp and silky and responsive. The DOM has performance problems, so what we're going to do is we're going to route everything through the canvas and make a fake DOM for users to access with accessibility software. There are all kinds of problems inherent with that, of course, and there was a public outcry from the more CSS-oriented and accessibility-friendly front-end development community. And very much of, why would you do that? Oh my God, that's bastardizing what Canvas is. No, why would you do that to get at the GPU? I mean, is performance worth the kittens? So the sad thing is, a lot of the people who were very upset about that didn't realize that interaction developers have been doing that for years already. There are a lot of really cool looking sites that you probably favorited on, Future of Web Awards, et cetera, where the developers did go in and say, we're just going right in through the canvas. I bet you they didn't make a fake DOM for the screen reader to read. And they didn't post about it either because their competitors would see what they were doing. So it was really nice of the Flipboard guys to post this and show everyone what horrible things people are doing because the DOM just doesn't render fast enough. You can't animate it fast enough. So yes, a lot of the UI designers very upset. What about the accessibility? And he was like, well, frame rate is an accessibility issue. It's true if you want to animate something and have it be and have the animations not completely disorient the user, it's got to have that lovely 60 frames per second, or you need to slap a motion blur on that and make sure that it's consistently hitting a mark. This really underscored, at least for vendors, that the DOM needs to be animated, needs to have better ways to animate. That's great. We have projects like Project Ganesh. I know Mozilla has just recently been researching, oh God, I forgot the name of their new engine that they're doing this with. I'm sorry, Mozilla, please forgive me. But the point is that browser vendors are very keen on getting that animation buttery smooth. So a smoothly animated DOM is on its way. This API aligns with that to help bring this into focus. So in the future, hopefully, the developers at Flipboard and at other companies that want to make this happy web app experience aren't going to have to go around their elbow to get to their arm. So I thought it was actually a really helpful discussion for everybody to have. All right, so we're hoping that the Web Animation API will help bring an end to Jank. Partly because in certain implementations, web animations will get their own thread, provided they don't tie into things happening on the main thread, like logic or triggering layout. It'll vary by vendor, but case pending. Speaking of layout, if you're curious about what properties do and do not trigger layout, CSStriggers.com is a listing of them on Chrome. This is not the same listing you'd get if you investigated Firefox. They don't have one of those yet, but Chrome doesn't have an RE animated yet. So maybe they should do each other a favor there. Getting around layout. Reflows are definitely a rendering engine problem, though. I mean, a lot of people, when they're trying to avoid reflows, doing all these things, bending over backwards to get around them. The point is, browsers are increasingly working on reducing reflows that happen when animating properties that shouldn't be, reflowing the layout, like background images. That's not, what? I'm pretty sure someone out there reflows things because of background images. Browsers are optimizing all the time. I mean, we can always fall back on opacity and transform. A really good safe bet. But we do have color, motion paths, and fingers crossed, absolute positioning coming in some browsers. I think Chrome has those on the list. And if you desperately need to take a shortcut through the GPU, the CSS property will change as a start. Basically, it lets the browser know this thing is going to change. Whatever you got to do to optimize it, do it. And it's fairly useful. It's a little awkward because it's a CSS property that's also like an interaction property. What are you doing? Put your interaction in my CSS. You know, why is peanut butter in my chocolate? Well, it's a stopgap. It'll do for now. It promotes, hopefully in the future, promoting things to their own layer where applicable, and will be the end of that horrible, horrible translate Z hack, which doesn't always improve performance depending on where you're putting it. I know I've put it on all kinds of things I shouldn't put it on. And maybe one day it will help us around canvas sneaks. So hang on to will change in the meantime. Now, how do we push the web animations forward? Everyone I talked to about this and interviewed when I was working on this talk, they all wanted me to say something different. They wanted me to end on a different note. The UI designers, they said, we really need tools. We need timelines so we can scrub back and forth through animations. We're getting that. Slowly but surely, we're getting there. Might change the way we write animations, but we're getting there. The interaction developers, they desperately wanted to see more browser support and performance. Interaction developers aren't going to adopt the web animation API until it has a better spread. Of course, the jilted animation library developer over in this corner here, he's often feeling like standardistas need to come down from their ivory towers and engage the community that has existed there for a very long time, and even stood by this thing that they love long after it was ostracized from the web development community. They just don't feel like they're a part of the project. And the standardistas just wanted me to show everyone how well it performed. Please, show them this animation API. Bring them into the fold. The sad thing is, if all these people were talking to each other, they would already know what each other think. All these people are off in their own worlds, and they all fret over their own problems. I have difficulty finding any of these 4 types of people who talk to the other types of people on a regular basis. Some of them are parts of design in an app company, and some of them, they build interactions for sales or marketing, and they never meet the people who are over talking accessibility and front-end development. And yeah, sometimes people are off in ivory towers. How can you talk to a designer through IRC? Do you know any designers who use IRC on a regular basis at home? Oh, you know, wait a minute. I'm in San Francisco. Of course they do. But in the rest of the country, they do not. So yes, sometimes people even antagonize each other, because when you've been building something you love for so long, and you have this process that you love, be it building states with CSS, or working on this API that you believe in, or having this library that you've been mothering when all the chips were set against you, you can feel very defensive of those things. And you don't like change. You don't want people telling you you're wrong or you should do something differently. No, you shouldn't be using CSS animations for that. We can't stop the animation train. It is coming. All we do is slow it down by antagonizing one another and not talking to each other. So here's the plan. We're going to get through this as a family. I love animation and my heart is so big. We're going to get through this as a family of animation. I'm going to tell you like it is. Interface designers, here's your job. Don't fear the JavaScript. You're going to need it. Tell your boss you need a day to get up to speed. Go play with that polyfill. Play with GSAP. Play with velocity. If you're really ambitious, go play with that polyfill and see how they all stack up to next to one another. You may find that some of this stuff makes your life so much more easier. You may find you hate it. It doesn't matter. It's a day you get to play, and that's part of the reason you're here. Interaction developers, don't be afraid of new things. Go to the polyfills page, read the feature set. At least you'll know what's coming. It's definitely way shorter than the spec, and it gives you room to give feedback. I'll have a link at the end of this for where you can give feedback and exactly who you give it to. Big heart. Animation library developers, go read the spec, give feedback. God knows, this guy needs it. Animation spec authors and implementers, find a better way to get feedback. Get out of the ivory tower. I used to make comics for a living, and I had teenage fangirls. You know how hard it is to get paid to make something online in the days before we had things like Kickstarter and Patreon, or however you pronounce it, and even PayPal? It's really hard. But one of the ways I got paid was that I went out and I met my readers in the field. When I got an email from someone saying, "Rachel, I love your comics," it's to my heart. "Why aren't you on Facebook?" I'd be like, "What's Facebook?" "Well, all right, you like Facebook. I'll have a Facebook profile, and every time I post a new comic, I'll tell you there." We didn't even have a word for social media back then, but that's what I did. And I went out and I met my readers in the field. My job was to serve them. And one is never so good that one cannot go out and meet someone in the field and see what they are doing and help them. Let the audience feel ownership. Let them partake. An email chain that's unsearchable and IRC are not enough. Only you guys are using this stuff anymore. Now, this is for everybody who didn't raise their hands at all. And those of you who did, but it's like a birthday treat. You all get to go home with some advice. I would like to ask that you respect each other. Discriminating against someone because of their tools can be just as damaging to community as discriminating against someone because of their race or gender orientation or anything, their religion. When we make those cruel jokes about Flash up front, we lost some very important things. We turned people away who had domain knowledge just because they didn't use tools we liked anymore. We turned on some of our best assets. That's not healthy. It's not good for the community. It's a bad habit. Only Athena sprung perfectly formed from Zeus's head. I know all of these things to some people can look imperfect. This API is not fully supported. But tool creation is a lot like evolution. We create new things. Sometimes we create them in ways other people don't approve of. And that challenges the state of the art. And that challenges the people who make APIs and implement them and browsers to come around and up their game. There is no bastardization. This is my favorite quote ever, because it's so true. It's John Lasseter, CCO of Pixar, blah, blah, big name. You could probably find this in a book of quotes, but I assure you, this one comes from my books on animation. The art challenges the technology, and the technology inspires the art. There's no wrong. Whatever you do, if you're challenging what we currently have, it's worth it. This is the URL where you can find all the information about how you can give that feedback, which is so important. Look, I even made a hashtag where we can all talk about this if you want to talk about it. It's simple and short. It also could be the Web Audio API hashtag, but I got there first. And ongoing coverage on my lovely little Web Animation Weekly newsletter. Anytime there's a new update in the field of animation, not just the Web Animation API, we cover all kinds of it, including Canvas and WebGL. I run it every week. It's in your inbox on Monday morning. It's awesome. Thank you guys so much for listening to Talk to Date. You've been a wonderful audience.